One of the first vehicles I owned when I moved to the US was a RAV4 EV. Not the Toyota Tesla second generation one, built with basically a Model S motor. No, this was the original RAV4 EV. Despite being 17 years old when we got it and having nearly 100,000 miles on the clock, it still had near its original range from its nickel metal hydride batteries. And this wasn't a trailer queen or a weekend plaything. This was my daily driver. And unlike Nikki, who replaced her RAV4 with a Bolt EV after just a year and a bit of ownership, I kept mine for 3. We'd still have it today if we'd have had a more local shop that could look after it. But with 100,000 miles on the clock, it was getting to a point where it could really do with a battery service, because the original packs in the RAV4 EV aren't sealed. And in damp climates, they need to be dropped and cleaned every so often, every 10, 20 years or so, because otherwise they start having connection issues. Now, the reason I bring this up is because it, along with the GM EV1, the Chevy S10 EV, the Honda EV Plus, and the Ford Ranger EV, to name but a few, were all built as a result of automakers' desperate and frankly begrudging attempts to meet the California Air Resources Board's requirement that, beginning in 1997, a massive 2% of vehicles sold in California would need to be zero emissions. The automakers cried, they begged, they pleaded, they fought. In some cases, they refused to sell anyone the vehicles and only leased them. And in many more cases, they only allowed a very select handful of people to buy the vehicles, again, only mostly allowing leasing, before, in most cases, taking back the cars and destroying them at the very first opportunity. And then, having ripped the vehicles people loved from their driveways and destroyed the evidence, they then ran back to politicians claiming the task was not merely Herculean, but impossible. California, as we know, blinked. Well, it got taken to court and was forced to delay the zero emissions vehicle program, in the end accepting that there were not 4 lights, but 5. The automakers argued that developing EVs was expensive, highly technical, and that the public really didn't want them anyway. And so it was into this environment, a world where EVs were considered so impossibly futuristic, with the technology of the day being so lackluster, that President George W. Bush and the 110th Congress, admittedly one where both the House and Senate were Democratic, signed into law a bipartisan agreement to advance green energy, decrease gasoline consumption, and lead to greater energy independence. In a time just following the terror attacks of 9/11, and in a world where the US is very much still embroiled in its war on terror, Republicans and Democrats alike wanted to rely on foreign oil as little as possible. The bill also originally called for cuts to subsidies for fossil fuel companies, which, might have been a good idea, since they seem to have spent those billions and billions and billions of dollars of subsidies on perverting justice and spreading their policy of impoverishing the population, rendering vast areas of countries unlivable, destroying democracy, and installing pro-fossil fuel dictators to the US. A big step up in their thinking, which had previously stuck to doing this in rather smaller, more malleable nations. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, God, no, not American politics again. But see, that little piece of 2007 legislation included something called the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program. It was set up to allow automakers and part suppliers the chance to get conditional low-interest loans from the federal government, specifically for the purpose of funding research, development, and production of lower-emission vehicles. Its goal? To call automakers bluff on their claim that it's just too expensive, and their other complaints about going electric. to effectively ensure that there was one less excuse that could be used by the auto industry when discussing why they couldn't make cleaner, greener cars. What's more, it wasn't restricted to just electric vehicles. It encompassed any advanced vehicle technology that resulted in lower gasoline consumption, in reduced or zero tailpipe emissions. And that bit of, we lend you money, you make things and pay us back, scratch our back, scratch your back. That's the reason that Tesla survived. It's the reason that Nissan made battery packs for the LEAF in Tennessee. It's the reason that we have the Ford and SK Innovation, now SK On, joint venture plant nearing completion in Stanton, Tennessee. It's the reason GM and LG Energy Solutions got a $2.5 billion loan to set up 3 factories for Ultium cells in Ohio, Tennessee, and Michigan. It's frankly the reason why across the world we're seeing so many EVs hit the market today. From small startups to legacy automakers, there are few companies making vehicles today who haven't benefited from that bill, either directly or indirectly. Because of its outsized financial impact, although don't worry, the US's dear leader is working hard on making sure the financial and political impact of the US is dramatically and abruptly curtailed. The US's investment in clean energy vehicles through the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program has really helped advance their widespread adoption. And despite being federally mandated into existence, I'm gonna stun you here, but someone with fewer morals than a Sith Lord hosting a trust fall workshop is trying to make sure no one else gets to benefit from the program, despite that very program being the reason that individual is so wealthy today. So let's talk about that. Okay, so the first thing to talk about, I think, is how things were working before they were, sabotaged. Well, the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program, which as of recording technically still sort of exists, but since we record these videos a few days, sometimes weeks in advance because, production times are a thing, it could have changed by the time we publish. So, Magic 8 Ball. Is the loan program still working? Yeah, that seems about right. The ATVM loan program, which is what most people in the industry call it, is a $25 billion program that was authorized under Section 136 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, and during its life has been administered by the US Department of Energy. Its intent was to act as a loan program for relatively high-risk investments in advanced technology vehicles. In its design, it assumes that around 30 cents out of every dollar lent will not be repaid because investing in new technology is an inherently risky activity. The long-term cost to the government was expected to be around $7.5 billion. For those of you who did the math in your head, well done, that is about the 30%. The expectation is that the rest of it will be paid back. And remember, a few $1 billion here and there in the US government's budget ain't much. And I should be really clear that while some news outlets were eager to claim that the ATVM loan program was simply a way of subsidizing electric vehicle toys for a wealthy elite, and especially during periods when a Democrat was the resident of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and created the impression among many voters that the funding pot was so easy to get unlimited funds from that it was a little like that one house on your street during Halloween that gave away scads of Yorkie bars and sherbet dib-dabs with never a second thought as to what the effect of that would be on young, sugar-addicted minds or teeth. That's actually never how the program operated. Yes, I crossed the streams and used British sweets as an example about American politics. Because we're us, and because frankly, if you've never eaten one too many sherbet dib-dabs, you've never lived. The ATVM program rules required all loans to be conditional. It wasn't like a bank where you go and borrow money to buy a new car and they check you're good for the credit and then just give you a lump sum. It was more like a house builder's mortgage. Applicants that were successful weren't given a lump sum. They were given a small amount from a much larger approved tranche of funding, but had to meet specific milestones and goals at certain times in order to unlock that extra money. If they didn't meet the goals, they weren't given further funding. That's actually why some of the companies that ended up not repaying their debts didn't end up scarfing up large amounts of money before they died. They missed their milestones, didn't get the rest of the cash, and then the government often got to step in and sell off the intellectual and physical property to recoup those funds that would have been otherwise completely lost. And the loans go towards, and again, I'm using present tense here, but by the time you're watching it, it quite possibly should be past tense and went towards investments that are reasonably related to the re-equipping, expanding, or establishing of a manufacturing facility in the US for advanced technology vehicles. As I said back in the intro, the program has had some pretty high-profile successes. Nissan received a $1.6 billion loan from it to support the construction of its advanced battery manufacturing plant, a paint plant, the retooling of the Smyrna, Tennessee facility for the production of the Nissan LEAF. And yes, I probably pronounced that wrong. This loan was actually part of the first conditional loans released under the ATVM program. Nissan, for its part, finished paying back that loan in 2017. Ford received a loan in 2009, which it used for a multitude of plant upgrades and, unfortunately, for the purpose of improving the V6 greenwash. Sorry, that's not its name, the V6 EcoBoost engine. And for its part, it finished paying back the loan, which amounted to $5.9 billion into the government's pocket once interest was accounted for in 2022. It then promptly turned around and borrowed $9.2 billion to go towards the setup of Blue Oval City, a plant which is nearing completion and which will be home to manufacturing for a new range of EVs from the brand, as well as manufacturing components for those vehicles. That is assuming that Ford manages to stay afloat in the New World Order, where EVs are not quite so popular in the US, and the population is reduced to hunting in ravening packs through denuded, bare-shelved Safeways. Also in 2022, the loan program loaned out yet more money to develop a graphite anode. That's chump change of $107 million to Syrah Technologies, $2 billion to Redwood Materials for EV manufacturing in Charleston, South Carolina. If you're wondering how that one's going, that company generated $200 million in revenue in 2024 and is planning for significant growth through 2025. Or was. So quite well up until now. You know, on the jobs and manufacturing front, historically we've worked on the basis that growing and producing more jobs in the US, that's usually considered a good thing. Apparently not so much anymore. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there was that loan of another $2.5 billion to GM and LG Energy for the Ultium battery factories. Now, let's be clear, not everything went well. Famously, Fisker Automotive received $192 million. That's million with an M, not B, just to be clear. That came out of its allotted $529 million loan, and it got that before declaring bankruptcy. Even despite that, the Department of Energy managed to recover $53 million of those dollars through a fire sale of assets, among other things. So not all that money was lost. And as a reminder, this loan program was set up with a planned quantity of that money being accepted as a potential loss. But I think that the loan that's perhaps most relevant today is the $465 million that Tesla famously applied for to help it turn the former NUMMI plant in Fremont, California into its first US-based production facility. Funding not only helped it buy the facility and some of the production equipment inside, but also helped Tesla financially sustain itself between the end of production of the Roadster and the start of Model S production. Tesla applied for the loans fairly early on in the ATVM loan program around late 2008. And, per the Washington Post reporting from the time, Tesla's CEO Elon Musk spent a significant amount of time and effort trying to secure funding at a time where Tesla was bleeding cash. According to two people directly involved in the process, he held daily briefings with company executives about paperwork and spent hours with a government loan officer. As we have said before, particularly when talking about Aptera's journey to production, building a vehicle is expensive. When Tesla soon after realized it was missing a crucial Environmental Protection Agency certification it needed to qualify for the loan just days before Christmas, it was Musk himself who went straight to the top, urging then EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson to intervene, according to one of the people speaking on a condition of anonymity. He was successful, and Tesla was one of the first 3 ATVM loan recipients, along with Ford and Nissan. Without that funding, or indeed the investment made in Tesla by Toyota and by Mercedes-Benz shortly thereafter, Tesla would not exist today. And it was thanks to that funding that Tesla reached Model S production, albeit behind its original promised schedule, ramping up sales enough that it paid off its loan in full early. So one might feel that it's somewhat disingenuous and hypocritical for the man who was so desperate to utilize government largesse himself to secure the survival of his own company, or at least the company that he bought his way into, to rip away that ladder from under others that might want to use it to ascend to success and feasibly become competitors to Tesla. Although it does appear that with the amazing management technique he employed to turn Twitter into a company worth 80% less than when he bought it, unless of course you ask him for a valuation, in which case everything is just dandy, he seems to be bringing that management noose to Tesla, with its value and market share hanging in the air, just the way that bowls of petunias don't. But since DOGE, or as it's more formally known, the Department of Operations for Grand Exploitation, has decided to attempt to kill the loan program, we should look at what impact this might have. Well, this is where it gets tricky, because the Trump regime has already shown itself willing to ignore the law, legal precedent, courts, rules, basically anything that might rein in activities it wants to engage in. Little things, like, shipping innocent citizens and legal residents out of the country to things that definitely aren't a concentration camp. I really do not want to get into Civics 101 here, but it appears that many people, including certain members of the cabinet and White House staff, do not understand that the president is not, in fact, charged with making new laws or indeed enforcing them. That's the job of the legislative and judicial branches, respectively, and that little bit of legislation I mentioned earlier, the one that establishes the ATVM loan program, it would need to either be replaced or repealed by the legislative branch, and then that legislation would need to be signed into law by the president on behalf of the executive branch, or it would need to be deemed as unconstitutional by the judicial branch and thus struck from law. Executive actions and wishful thinking does not change the law of the land. So whether the government will actually disperse the funds to projects it's already approved and contractually agreed to give money to, who knows? Most likely those funds will be delayed at the very least, potentially slowing construction or the commissioning of production lines at facilities that are mostly built. Thankfully, those bigger projects from Ford, SK On, LG Chem and GM might be able to continue, although as GM announced last week, it expects the auto industry tariffs that it's also dealing with to cost it several billions of dollars. So it's anyone's guess. What we can say for absolutely certain is that there will be court cases for breach of contract, court cases that will be long and cost taxpayers a lot of money. Where it's most likely to really hurt, though, is in the projects that needed smaller sums. Companies that are taking more of a risk in the process of building something novel or risky. The kinds of companies that find it hard to get traditional financing and may not want to or may not be able to play the game with venture capitalists. Right now, completely unconnected to the ATVM loan programs, there are two suppliers in the US taking each other to court over who will pay for the money they invested to help ramp up parts production for a future all-electric Ram HD pickup. A pickup truck that Stellantis has now shelved plans for and whose smaller sibling, the Ram 1500 EV, is, well, heavily delayed. Those companies that are truly innovative and are small are unlikely to be able to access the kind of vast quantities of cash that Ford, GM, SK On, LG Chem can throw at this problem. And all that is going to hurt the US's competitive abilities in the long term, because whatever wishful thinking the fossil fuel executives are engaged in, and whatever cognitive decline-based hallucination Dear Leader is inhabiting, the rest of the world is moving on from fossil fuels regardless of what the US does. And if US automakers want to compete anywhere outside the US, they're already behind and playing catch-up. This just makes that many, many times harder. And look, we can talk about the fact that Musk's wild hypocrisy here extends so much further. In the first 9 months of 2024, nearly half of Tesla's net income came from regulatory credits, thanks to legacy automakers' failure to transition to EVs, another thing that he is endeavouring to cut. Tesla's also profited from credits for a battery swapping facility at Harris Ranch. You might be thinking, but Tesla, unlike certain Chinese automakers, does not have battery swapping facilities. But it does. It has, or possibly had, one that the public couldn't use. It's a thing that I won't call fake, only because it does technically exist. And it harvested millions of dollars of credits from California's emissions regulatory scheme. We can talk about the fact that Musk, through Tesla, SpaceX, and Solar City, has benefited in total from around $38 billion worth of public funds through contracts that, interestingly, do not seem to be quite as much on the chopping block as some of the much smaller amounts that he's curiously focused on in the wanton destruction beam of DOGE. We could talk about the fact that the amount that this disgusting operation for gratifying Elon has supposedly saved from the federal government is, in reality, basically at best zeroed out by the costs from redundancy, by the legal costs from the challenges to these illegal moves, and will, long term, then massively undermine the ability of the government to generate money and support investment going forward. We could very pointedly ask about the slashing of more than 1,200 employees from the Department of Energy and the mothballing of the loan program office, which has been a major source of income for the government, and the fact that two domestic battery manufacturers, Core Power and Freya Power, have killed their efforts to build plants in Arizona and Georgia, respectively, and that Aspen Aerogels, a company that makes thermal barriers for EV batteries, it's nixed plans for a facility in Georgia. We could ask how this is ever going to improve the economy, but we know the answer. It's not. It's going to continue our relentless drive towards, at best, a recession caused by a mixture of utter financial ineptitude, bigotry, and stupidity, because this isn't driven by some grand master plan for bringing wealth to the masses. This is about concentrating more wealth in one or two specific billionaires' pockets. It's about putting in place a government that works for one very specific group of individuals, the very, very rich. It's going to hobble our ability to move to a clean energy future because Musk cares not one iota for that. Now, back when I was being a shrieking harpy prior to the election, as so many of you who watch the channel were, we pointed to the giant book of terrible things that Project 2025 published. You remember, the one that Trump claimed to know nothing about. And that's not just because he literally does not actually know a single actual fact. Yeah, you remember that giant policy plan, the one written by the people that Trump has now employed. In it, it was extremely clear that this future looks one particular way. And that way is bleak. And I want to come to you at the end of this video and have something positive to say. You know what I like? I like telling you about cool science. I like shoving papers into my head slowly grokking them and sharing the excitement of the future with you. I like it when we review a car and it really is good. I love it when we get to report on a new battery technology and the authors of the paper go, "You covered that really well," and it means that you know something new and exciting. I love it when we report on something like the massive increase in public transit usage when it's made free and more reliable, or when car-free zones are born. I want to talk to you about how a good public policy like the congestion charge in New York has been massively successful. I want to bring you along for the ride as I convert my 1969 Morris Minor Rebecca to an EV. But I don't get to do those fun things right now because we are in the midst of a 5-alarm fire, and the firefighters appear to be on vacation. I can't do those things with you right now because this agglomeration of evil and incompetent is ripping the copper from the walls and selling the plumbing and telling you it's part of a renovation plan when it has no plan to put anything back in its place. This regime is deporting people as the first step in enacting its version of Franz Rademacher's Madagascar plan. And so, when asked what we should do when Musk, Trump and their acolytes are hacking the government of the US to shreds to ensure that it's dysfunctional except for the purpose of making a small group of grifters and white supremacists money, the answer is stand up and demand that they stop. We used to tell you the answer is to call your reps, write them, harangue them, and get them to do the right thing. But that has so clearly not been enough. I'm not saying you don't. You still need to do that. But the folks who should be blocking the illegality in every conceivable way are behaving as though it's business as usual. So the answer is also to stand in the streets. Do what you can to prevent these illegal actions from taking place. Protest in every way you can and in every way you feel able to. They want you to believe this debasement of American society is unstoppable. And they are wrong.
Thanks for joining us today. And if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord room, on our Patreon page, down below, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon or Blue Sky. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They're part of the massive community of supporters who make this channel possible, helping us through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and helping us to remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here and mispronounced horribly by me, just follow the links below. We've got options across a range of different price points from $1.50 US a month. A massive welcome to our newest supporters: Baz Meendertsma, Dan Morton, DX Watt, There's Jer, Magnetar Explorer, Ron THX1138, Jonas V, John Leonard, Joe Weekend Dog Dad, Yalalfi, David Hardin, Enzo Tickus, Ed Runyon, Beth S, Mitch Rassner, Brad Crowshawn, Leighton, Dennis, Stephen Beetle, Albert Beatty, Peterson, Ya, Todd Fraser, Rick B, Paul, Andrew Diet, Tim Bedford, John Sammons, Sar Gibson, JTPDX, Tyler Walker, Gary Dean Mercer Clark, Roboman410, and John Galley. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame, and you can even gift membership to someone else. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations. And we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at, for the time being, addressed below. You'll also find links to our swag store, and if you're someone who has to shop on Amazon, please consider using our affiliate link so we get the commission, not Jeff Bezos. So we can continue to focus on making our content even better and reduce burnout, we're being a little freer with our release days, but plan on dropping new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on our main channel, plus something on Sunday over on TE Take 2. If you want more, the algorithm that hates us thinks you should be watching this video, but this video is the one we'd like you to check out. Be kind, be awesome, be intentional, and don't forget to resist. Keep evolving!